will tell you the story how we got it done, but I want to take a step back first. And we're not here to hear from me, we're here to hear from Lester. I always love listening to Lester talk. I just want to not embarrass him too much. But Lester is not only a dear friend of mine, he's my mentor and a champion. He has a huge, he doesn't do this very often. He's on the air every single night, live, and has a very busy job, as you can imagine. And when he comes out and speaks, it's for an important reason that he cares about. And this afternoon, in a few hours from now, he has an enormous, huge interview. But he still is here and woke up early this morning to be here to talk about this. I thank you for that, and I know that everybody else thanks you for that as well. And thank you for all you do, because you've made my job infinitely easier, because none of this would be done without you. And I love you to death. All right, so that's my part. Let's just take a step back, Lester, and why don't we start talking about you and as a young reporter, and when you became aware of this issue, just your time as a young reporter.
Yeah, first of all, Dan, thank you for everything you said. We have a kind of a mutual admiration society, in case you haven't picked up on it here a little bit. In the car, we were going over, well, I think you should talk more. No, you should talk more.
Believe me, they want to hear me.
But this is a topic that is near and dear to both of our hearts, so happy to talk about it. My experience, I'll just give you a quick thumbnail. I took a pretty unorthodox way of getting where I am today. I started working in radio when I was in high school, radio news when I was in college, left college before graduation to pursue a reporting job in San Francisco. In both those places, I was kind of the crime reporter. They gave me a Jeep Cherokee. They outfitted it with two-way radios and police scanners, and I would chase police calls and fire incidents, that sort of thing. But I really had an appreciation and enjoyed doing crime reporting. But it was from a different point that I am now. It's from a point of the people that we covered that were getting arrested likely did it, and we didn't question. I didn't question it in perhaps the way that I do now, where I examine every case that comes before us and for its veracity. And so that was an important part. And then I moved to television, did more crime reporting. I think probably the turning point that really tuned me to some of the issues we're faced today in criminal justice and criminal justice reform was in the late 90s. I was a witness to an execution, a media witness in Illinois. George Delvecchio was the condemned person. Remember that night, I think it was a midnight execution, but they brought us into the execution room, separated by glass, for Mr. Delvecchio. Watching this process, this very formal process take place, one that I really had never really thought much about. Society, supported the idea of death penalty. I never really questioned it. But watching the process and the warden with the headsets on and proceed, and just the rehearsed nature of it, I had this overwhelming urge to want to go, hold on a second. Can we just stop here and just talk this through a little bit? So I understand the state's about to take a life. I'm not taking a position, but you can't witness something like that without questioning or thinking about this process, what's behind it, who's behind it, and why we do it. And that was probably the first moment that I began to look at the criminal justice system through a different lens, how we apply it, what our ultimate goal is. Is our ultimate goal to make the world safer, to make our cities safer, or is it retribution? I think these are all important questions that we have to ask. And so, I approached it that way. Dan and I started working together, 10 years ago?
Longer than that, my friend.
Longer than 10
When
years.
you get older, age starts.
I'll let you know when I get there. But Dan began introducing me to stories, some of which I was incredulous. He would either do his Kramer moment where he burst in the door, or a blitz of emails. But some of the stories he would bring me there were potential wrongful conviction cases. I remember looking at them and reading it through, and I'm like, well, I don't understand. What's the issue? This person clearly, deserves a new trial, or whatever the case may be. And that's when I began to understand the complexities of how our system, what our system aspires to be, and what it sometimes does in terms of not looking at things through, I guess, as a layman, kind of a common sense lens. And we began doing some important, but I hope people recognize it's a very important work, not only in the area of wrongful convictions, but also getting into the heart, going into the prison, going into the heart of the criminal justice system. Mass incarceration has really defined a lot of our work. And it's been an eye-opener for me, and I try to present it that way to the viewer as well. That these are areas that sometimes are not explored. As we'll talk in a moment, they're difficult stories. People wake up, they read headlines of another person pushed in front of a subway, another person beaten down on the streets. It creates a narrative that the world is dangerous, more dangerous than it has been. We can talk in a moment about statistics. We know that's not the case in many of these instances, but fear is out there, and we need to be able to tell these stories in a way that can get past the fear and the emotion and help people understand what exactly is happening, why it may be happening, and give it some historical perspective. Dan, I know you and I were talking about some of those cases. In fact, you've got some documentation.
I do. Yeah, I'll just, before I show that, I read that documentation, which I find interesting, looking back more than a decade ago. For me, this is an issue that I wasn't looking for. This is an issue that found me, in that I had done a story with police officers. It was right after 9/11. And the NYPD were the rock stars of the city, the heroes of the country, and I thought, I think that viewers would be interested in riding along with the NYPD to see what they did. And so I got embedded with the NYPD in the Bronx, and I was assigned, a detective was assigned to me, a homicide detective, and I'm following murders for a couple of weeks. And I say to him, we formed a special bond, his name was Bobby. I say to him, you must bring this job home with you, everything that you see. And he says, I really don't, except this one case has been bothering me for a decade. That's like a producer's dream. What's that about? And he says, there was a murder at the Palladium nightclub in 1990 in Manhattan. I never heard about it. I was a Bronx detective, but I was taking down a gang in the Bronx, and I know who did it. These two guys named Joey and Spanky. And we started reinvestigating that case. And on camera, he finds information in front of my camera that the Manhattan DA's office, for lack of a better term, didn't turn over. Saying Joey and Spanky from 550 East 139th Street did it, like a 911 call minutes after the crime. Spanky's sister-in-law saying he tried to rape me and he did the Palladium murder. He was even identified as a witness, but the problem was, as a suspect, but the problem was that they had two other guys locked up. And through that experience, what happened was that when Bobby found that information, he goes to his bosses at the legal division, and he says, what's my obligation? I've got Dateline following me around. And eventually, his bosses ordered him to remain silent. He was kicked off the case. I was kicked out. He quit his job as a detective. He's a first-grade homicide detective in New York. He quit his job as a detective to talk to me on camera about it. And then the DA's office started to reinvestigate the case, and I started talking to the assistant district attorney in Manhattan. And about a year into his investigation, he says, yeah, these guys are innocent. He was ordered to protect the convictions. He quit his job to talk to me on camera about it. This was all on TV, nominated for anything, I should say. Didn't win, but what I'm telling you, like, even when I say it, I almost can't believe it. But it really happened, and it really happened because I know, because I see it on TV sometimes. He quit his job to talk to me on camera about it. I continued to investigate the case. I find the real killer. I find Spanky. I bring him to Rockefeller Center. He basically confesses on tape. And David Lemus, the innocent guy, was released. But to this day, after 15 years in prison, but to this day, And that was in 2005. Not only has the Manhattan District Attorney's Office never admitted they were wrong, they retried David Lemus.
Shame.
Spanky got on the stand during the retrial, swore an oath and said, I'm the killer, I don't know that guy. And he was acquitted. That was my baptism. That was my introduction into the pathology of this criminal legal system.
Good word.
I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. Because if a cop and a prosecutor, whose job it is to lock people up, can't get their own system to listen, what else am I missing? So for me, it was the innocence movement that actually, and what happened was that David Lemus shared a wall in prison with a guy named J.J. Velasquez. And J.J. says, I'm innocent too. And wrote me a letter in 2002, and I spent 10 years investigating his case and did a story about that. He only got out a couple of years ago after 23 years in prison. He led me to 4 other people that I did stories on, one of which Lester did with me, that helped get them out. So the further I got into this issue, I realized the pathology of it, because I felt like a character in a Kafka novel. Like, this is a bottle of water. We can all agree this is water. But some DAs will tell you that it's an elephant. You're like, no, I think we can all say it's water, right? And so the more I learned about this, and the more people I spoke with, people like my friend Jeffrey Deskovich, who was wrongfully convicted and spent 16 years in prison, I learned how, and I keep using this word, pathological it is, and it didn't just come for me through wrongful convictions. It was the prism of innocence that opened the door to me of the humanity of everyone in prison.
Yes, sir.
And so, by the time I came to Leicester in 2011, I think it was, I had done that story in 2005, and these stories, you know, Liz Cole and Paul Ryan, my bosses at Dateline and every other network, by the way, they care about these stories. It's not that they don't care about stories like these, but this is a business. And what happens is, in reality, these stories often fail to gain traction with audiences. So it's very, very, very hard to sell the stories. So what am I going to do? Lester Holt, right? So Lester becomes the savior of my life, and a lot of other people, by the way, for taking this on. And I think, and he can speak for himself, but I think when we started, it was also maybe an evolution for him as well. And the documentation that he's referring to, I looked last night at this email, I went back. Good thing I'm an organized dude sometimes. So there was a story about a guy named Darryl Kelly. It was 2011, I found out about him. And he was in prison for raping his daughter when she was 9. She was at the point, now she was like 22. But when she was 9, like 6 months after the conviction, she came forward and said, my mother, who was a drug addict, forced me to say this, it never happened. And no one believed her. Well, because Lester's Lester, I was able to secure an interview with the mother, who's now drug-free. She said, I did. I made her say this. It didn't happen. The daughter, who's in her 20s and has a child, is visiting her father in prison, trying to get him out. So I'm like, Lester, we got to do this story. So I sent him, I go and visit Lester, Kramer-like, and I gave him some information, and I looked for this email, and this is what he sent me in 2011. I said, Lester, I know how busy you are, just let me know what you think when you get the time to read it. This is Lester's response. Oh, okay, I read this stuff. What am I missing here? It seems open and shut that he didn't do it. Is there another side to this? Something here that should make me skeptical or even smell a conspiracy? And the answer was, and I think he knows now, no. Because that's the way the system works.
Indeed.
And we've done story after story after that that has proven that. So I don't know if that was a turning point for you, But the idea that people can be ripped from their lives, literally kidnapped by the state, thrown in a cell with scant, precious little evidence, and nobody seems to care.
We did another story, Richard Rosario, who was arrested, tried, convicted of murder. He had 13 alibi witnesses. The murder happened, it was the Bronx, right? Murder happened in the Bronx. He says, well, I was in Florida on that date.
I remember that.
They had 13 alibi witnesses, including a local sheriff in Florida, some other folks, the wife of his friend who was about to go through labor, so she clearly remembered the day
And didn't
when
like
he was there. And by the way, didn't like him, didn't want him sleeping on her couch, so it was seared in her memory. 13 alibi witnesses, and they were not investigated.
So, yeah, so I found out about that story. I went to Florida, and I drove around Florida. He literally kind of knocked on the door of the precinct in 1996, saying, I hear you're looking for me. I was in Florida. And he's the one that gave names, contact information, phone numbers to the police. For 20 years, no one from the NYPD or the Bronx District Attorney's Office ever called those people. And there were 2 eyewitnesses, and his defense attorneys dropped the ball for various reasons. And yeah, as Lester says, one of the alibi witnesses was a cop. Another was a correction officer. Another was a pastor. He had been denied every appeal to the United States Supreme Court. And so, once I started to understand that, I started to become a student, more of a student of the system. And the more I become, and I still am, and the more I become a student of the system, I realize how, again, pathological it is from every perspective. In other words, just yesterday, for example, or the other day, there was a tragedy, as we all may know, in New York. Terrible, terrible, terrible tragedy, where an officer was shot. Officer Jonathan Diller, who left behind a wife, young wife, and a 1-year-old child. Horrible. The headline of the New York Post was, officer's wife in eulogy slams politician for spiraling crime in New York. The only problem is that there isn't spiraling crime in New York. So what I've come to understand is that these issues that we're talking about, not only wrongful convictions, the whole legal system, is based on nothing but gut emotion. It's based on what we feel should be right, what we're angry about, what we think should be done. And what happens is people who read those stories vote for politicians who pass laws without any deliberation or analysis as to whether those laws actually work or not. And what ends up happening, as many of you know, is that laws are passed that cost us a lot more money to make us less safe. And so when that's right in front of me, and there's, we did that sizzle reel in this project in 2019. That was the year before George Floyd died. So we were at this for a while. And actually, we should tell that story, unless you have another one that you want to tell.
No, I was just going to point that not all our work is wrongful conviction. A lot of it is based on this notion of mass incarceration and what that's costing us as a country, and how we're responding to it.
Exactly. Which I now want to circle the loop back about how we got that done. Lester was invited to. Lester and I were invited to go tour prisons in Germany and Norway in 2018, where they administer justice very different. It's based on 2 words: human dignity. And so Lester couldn't go because he's Lester, and he's on the air every night. But intellectually, I knew what was happening. But when I was there was a very tactile, emotional reaction to see, oh, we can do this a different way. I can see it. Officers there are trained in social work. A good day there is to help somebody not come back to prison. A good day here is to go home alive. There, you wear your own clothes. Here, you're shaved and wear a uniform. There, you close your door. Here, you have a check every hour. There, you eat fresh food. Here, you eat processed food, right? So there's all sorts of differences. And I came back on fire on that flight. and I did my Kramer at the end, and I became Kramer on speed. And we walked into Lester's office, and I got an idea. You know? Oh, this is a week-long series called Justice for All. Every show on NBC News and MSNBC does a story about criminal justice reform. Let's do the first ever town hall meeting at Sing Sing with incarcerated people there, and how about we try and get you locked up for 2 nights in Angola? And if I had said that to anybody but Lester, I either would have been fired or laughed out of the room. So when we talk about narrative, what we needed to do, what I felt we needed to do, is we needed to create our own narrative internally to even get this project done.
But before you go there, let me just point out that one of the caution flags I think, once I got wind of the idea that he was actually serious about this, one of the caution flags is I didn't want it to be a stunt. And these kinds of things can be stunts. Hey, I'm going to play a prisoner for a couple of nights.
Right.
I didn't want that. I thought Dan had a very eloquent way of putting it. It's like being embedded, you know, in a war zone. I've been with the military in war zones, and yes, you put on a helmet and flag vest because that's what you need. I'm not playing soldier. I'm not a soldier. I just need to be close to you to understand what a soldier does and understand this war you're fighting. That was the approach that was paramount to me, that if we're going to do this, let's have a reason for it, and let's be able to come back and with a texture for what mass incarceration looks like from the inside.
And that was our guiding North Star following that. And I thought that there was nothing more important than America's most beloved human being, as far as I'm concerned. To be among people, human beings, to show what's really happening when people don't get to see it. So what we did is we formed our own narrative and had this idea. I put together a sizzle reel with my friend Kim, who's another producer of Lester's. And we made a graphic, and we had an audience of 1 person, which was the president of NBC News. And we spent all this time making a 3-minute sizzle reel just to sell this concept. And we have it here. That's the second clip there, Ben.
Obviously, your best day was getting out of prison. What was the lowest day?
Every time I think about that cell.
Like so many other people, I'd heard about criminal justice reform, but over the last couple of years, I've done story after story after story that has really opened up my eyes in a different way. What is it like being in prison?
It's terrible. Being in prison, being in jail with other individuals that have been in here before, and they can see when somebody's not supposed to be there. You're going through the pits of hell.
We think of jails and prisons as places we put anybody we don't like, anybody who's not doing exactly what we tell them to do. And we ought to be thinking about jails and prisons as the place we put people who absolutely cannot be managed any other way, who are a threat to public safety.
I'm not saying that nobody deserves to go to prison. People should have fair chances that everyone has. They say everyone should be equal.
A quarter of the world's prison population is in this country, whereas we only represent 5% of the world's population. There are something like 2.3 million people behind bars right now. That works out about 1 in every 37 people.
We have become the most punitive society in the world. We have the highest rate of incarceration in the world.
The rate of incarceration in this country, you look at that against a chart against NATO countries, you have to look at the numbers and understand this isn't working. What we're looking at is a national crisis. It affects mental health, it affects families.
You know, we live in a country where the Bureau of Justice predicts that 1 in 3 black male babies born in this country is expected to go to jail or prison. And nobody seems to be upset about that.
1 in 3. It's astounding. I remember in my days as a street reporter in Chicago talking to kids who would say, you know, my only choice is I'm either going to end up dead or I'm going to end up in prison.
I think everyone should be held accountable when they break the law. It's not fine for us to create an industry of putting people in jails and prisons who are not a threat to public safety.
95% of the people behind bars, they're coming home. They're going to be your neighbors. They're going to be, you know, walking down the same street that you walk down.
I do believe that each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. I think if someone has a gun, they're not just a thug. I think even if someone takes something that doesn't belong to them, they're not just a thief. And we owe it to ourselves to create a kind of society where humans have the ability to stand back up.
My daughter needs to get on a job and be a father.
Our job is to shine light in dark places. This is not a one-off discussion. This isn't a spot on nightly news and an interview on MSNBC. This is where we really leverage our reach across the entire NBC News brand, because there are so many stories within this story that need to be told. There's a lot of territory to cover, and so we have to commit to this, that we're doing this.
That was for an audience of members. And I make no apologies for it, but I thank God for you, because it's like you say no to the face of NBC News. And it was Lester that got that, and it all, by the way, it all happened. All of it happened. One of the people that, first we saw Brian Stevenson in there, we'll talk about that in a minute, but some of the people that we met at Angola, I think was moving for both of us. I don't know if you want to talk about your experience at hospice or with Henry Montgomery.
First of all, Brian Stevenson, I've gotten to know rather well over the last few years, and he's one of those people who are really opening eyes about the legacy in this country going back to slavery to mass incarceration today. There's a through line, and he tells it. I was in Montgomery just a few weeks ago. He tells it through what they call the legacy museums. They have one that's focused on that journey from slavery to mass incarceration. Another that focuses on the brutal history of lynching in this country, and then one they're opening up any day now, where